Jeanne Villepreux Power, The Aquarium Revolution. Greatness. We will share the stories of women who wore no crowns, yet changed the world just the same. Astronomers who mapped the stars. Writers who rewrote the rules. Scientists, explorers, and revolutionaries whose brilliance could not be contained by any throne. They may not have ruled kingdoms, but they reigned in labs, in letters, in movements, and in minds. So, my dear, fluff your pillow a little softer. The age of queens may be over, but the age of extraordinary women is just beginning. Today, it is Jeanne Villepreux Power, the woman who brought the ocean indoors. And now, dear dreamer, we dive beneath the waves, not literally, not yet, but through history, through salt, science, and quiet rebellion. The tide is gentle, the stars hang low, and we follow a woman who dared to ask questions the sea was not ready to answer. There are no royal palaces here, no red carpets, only a woman with windswept hair, salt on her lips, and a mind sharper than a jellyfish's sting. She did not conquer empires or seduce crowds. She observed, patiently and closely. Her name was Jeanne Villepreux Power, and she created a home for the sea on land. She watched, she waited, and in that stillness, she saw things no one else had bothered to notice. Before Jane Goodall watched chimpanzees, before Marie Curie illuminated radiation, there was Jeanne, kneeling by the glass, peering into a silent world and listening. She was born on September 24, 1894, in Juillac, a small hamlet lost in the Corrèze region of south-central France. If you imagine quiet hills, humble stone cottages, and days drifting by like clouds, you've got the picture. Her family was poor, not nobly poor, not literarily poor, just poor. Her father was a shoemaker, her mother a peasant woman with too many children and too few prospects. Jeanne was not born with a microscope or a private tutor. She didn't even have proper shoes, but she possessed that dangerous, precious thing, curiosity. From a young age, she wandered. She touched things, plants, rocks, insects, bones. She didn't name them, but she remembered them. And while other girls were being taught to sew and curtsy, Jeanne was mastering something far more valuable: how to observe. At 18, Jeanne left Juillac and, on foot, yes, on foot, walked over 400 kilometers to Paris. She had no wealth, no title, no carriage, only legs, grit, and some invisible compass that guides stubborn girls toward a more significant life. Paris in 1812 was chaos and culture mixed. Napoleon still ruled. The salons buzzed with art and ideas, and the streets smelled of ambition mixed with questionable hygiene. Jeanne, ever practical, became a seamstress apprentice, but not just any seamstress, a designer for the aristocracy. She had a natural talent for it, precision, patience, elegance. Soon she was making dresses for high society. Her hands stitched lace, but her mind was always elsewhere. She worked in silence, but watched everything. The way the light moved, the way fabric bent, the symmetry of petals, the spiral of shells, patterns, always patterns. It was during this time she met James Power, an English merchant. He was curious, open-minded, and, unusually for the time, completely unthreatened by an intelligent woman. They married in 1818 and soon moved to the island of Sicily. And it is here, dreamer, that Jean blossomed. Sicily was wild, sun-baked, and full of volcanic energy. The ocean there didn't just lap, it thundered. And Jean, finally free from the seamstress's bench, turned to her true love, nature. Quietly at first, casually, then fiercely, she became a naturalist. She collected shells, rocks, and sea creatures. She studied everything from hummingbirds to fossils. But it was the ocean, mysterious, capricious, teeming with life, that truly captured her attention. This is where the story gets exciting. At the time, marine biology was in its infancy. The idea that one could study sea life without wrenching it dead from the water was almost absurd. Scientists collected specimens dead, dried, deformed, and made guesses based on their lifeless remains. But Jean had a different idea. What if? What if we don't kill them to understand? What if we observe them alive? So, in 1832, Jean did something utterly revolutionary. She created the first glass aquarium. Not just a bowl, but a controlled environment, a system, a window into the secret lives of marine creatures. She made 3 versions: a small glass box for indoor study, a larger model with a flowing seawater system, and a massive cage placed directly in the sea, an early version of what we would now call a marine enclosure. And just like that, she opened the door to an entirely new way of knowing. Her most famous work was on the Argonauta Argo, the paper nautilus. At the time, male scientists were certain that this strange little octopus lived in shells that it stole from other creatures, that it was essentially a marine squatter. But Jean didn't agree. She placed the Argonaut in her tank and waited, watched. Days passed. Then she saw it. The Argonaut made its shell, secreted it from its own body, sculpted it like clay. It was a builder, not a thief. She documented the process with incredible precision, disproving a century of scientific nonsense, and sent her findings to the Academy. And they, eventually, grudgingly, agreed. This moment, dear dreamer, is a quiet revolution. A woman with no formal education, no university degree, and no powdered wig, correcting the men in charge because she had something rarer than prestige: proof. Jean did not stop. She published books, wrote papers, and corresponded with other naturalists across Europe. She was made a member of the Catania Academy of Natural Sciences, its first female member. Her name began to circulate in scientific circles, not loudly, but steadily. But then, disaster struck. In 1838, during a return voyage to London, the trunk carrying all her research, drawings, data, and specimens was lost at sea, vanished. Years of work evaporated. And this is perhaps the most cruel part of her story, because Jean did not start over. The loss seemed to break something in her. She retreated, still pursuing research, yes, but quietly. Her legacy, once so promising, began to fade. By the time she died in 1871, her name was largely forgotten. Her glass aquariums, her discoveries about the Argonauts were credited to others, ignored, muted by the selective memory of history. But dreamer, history is not a straight line. It bends, it loops, it surfaces. In the late 20th century, marine biologists began to rediscover Jean's contributions. A French marine biologist named Daniel Guirault brought her work back into the light. Suddenly, Jeanne's name reappeared in science journals, in exhibits, even in Google Doodles. She was there all along. Like so many brilliant women, she was buried under centuries of almost and not quite. But the tide is turning. Her story flows again. So, dear dreamer, as you listen to the silence of your own breathing, think of her not to the sound of trumpets or crowns, but to the quiet clinking of glass and the swirl of seawater. Think of the woman who looked into a tank and saw a world, who waited instead of assuming, who asked the sea to show her the truth, and then, most bravely, believed what she saw. Let her remind you that observation is power, that silence is not submission, that even the smallest creature— Amelia Earhart, the woman who flew beyond the map. Now we won't walk, we'll fly. Close your eyes. Feel the hum of a twin-prop engine slicing through the clouds, the wind pressure on the cockpit window, the smell of aviation oil and fresh resolve. Today, we're not in a palace, a prison, or a lab. We are in the sky, tracing the arc of a woman who lived with one foot on the ground and the rest of her somewhere above it. This is the story of Amelia Earhart, a woman who soared above expectations, defied gravity and society, and vanished without ever truly disappearing. She didn't just break barriers, she treated them like suggestions. So buckle up, dear dreamer. The engines are warm, the flight plan is ambitious, the story is worth the altitude. Amelia Mary Earhart was born on July 24, 1897, in Atchison, Kansas. Her childhood was not glamorous and certainly not stable. Her father, Edwin, struggled with alcoholism. The family moved often, money was scarce, and her mother, Amy, came from a wealthy family but raised her daughters unconventionally, without corsets, with tree climbing, and with the freedom to be loud. Amelia was no typical Edwardian girl. She built ramps to jump off the roof. She collected insects, shot rats with a .22 rifle, wore trousers when she could, and refused to be told to smile. When she first saw an airplane at a state fair, she said it looked like a thing of rusty wire and wood. No flash of lightning, no instant love. That would come later. For now, she wanted more than flight. She wanted freedom. She dabbled in education. Columbia University, then dropped out. Re-enrolled, dropped out again. She was smart, curious, and driven, but restless. Then World War I broke out. Amelia became a volunteer nurse's aide in Toronto, caring for wounded soldiers. She saw what war did to bodies, what duty meant. She developed a kind of quiet steel. After the war, in 1920, she attended an air show in California. A pilot offered her a ride. She was in the air for 10 minutes, and that was it. The minute I was in the cockpit, I knew I had to fly, she said. Flying was expensive, very expensive. So Amelia worked every job she could, truck driver, stenographer, photographer, to pay for lessons. She trained under Nita Snook, one of the first female aviators. She learned fast and flew faster. She cut her hair short, bought a brown leather jacket, and slept in her flying clothes to make them look worn. In 1922, she bought her first plane, a Kinner Airster. She named it the Canary. The same year, she set her first record, a women's altitude record of 14,000 feet. She wasn't famous yet, but she was hungry to fly. In 1928, Amelia got a call that changed everything. A wealthy socialite, Amy Guest, planned to be the first woman to fly across the Atlantic, but her family objected. They needed a girl with the right image. Enter Amelia. She didn't pilot the plane, she was a passenger, along with a mechanic and a male pilot, but she went into history as the first woman to cross the Atlantic by air. The press exploded.
Headlines called her Lady Lindy, comparing her to Charles Lindbergh. She hated the nickname, but she smiled for the cameras. Suddenly, she was uncomfortably famous. Amelia knew what fame meant: money and leverage. She lectured, endorsed products, and wrote a bestseller. She used the income to buy planes, finance flights, and support other female aviators. She didn't want to be a mascot. She wanted to fly. She became an editor for Cosmopolitan, a more serious and unusual magazine back then, and used her platform to advocate for aviation. She promoted commercial air travel, helped design a line of women's clothing that was genuinely functional, and carved out space for women in fields where they were denied. In 1931, she married George Putnam, a wealthy publisher and her longtime promoter. But Amelia didn't want a traditional marriage. Before the wedding, she wrote George a letter that read like a manifesto.
I shall not hold you to any medieval code of faithfulness to me, nor shall I consider myself bound to you. It wasn't about infidelity, it was about independence. He agreed, and she kept her own name. In 1932, Amelia finally did what no woman and only one man before her had done. She flew the Atlantic solo. All alone in a tiny Lockheed Vega, carrying only a thermos of soup and a can of tomato juice. She flew through ice storms with a cracked windshield. She landed in a field in Ireland, soaking wet and shaking, and stepped directly into legend. The world cheered. President Hoover gave her a medal. France gave her the Chevalier of the Legion of Honor. And she gave other women permission to dream louder. Amelia did not stop. She flew coast to coast, set speed records, altitude records, and advocated for women in STEM before it was a buzzword. She helped found the 99s, a group of female pilots. She made the solo flight from Hawaii to California, the first person, male or female, to do so. She was called reckless. She wasn't. She was prepared. She studied charts, planned refueling, and checked every nut and bolt. And yet, she knew flying was a risk. She embraced it. In 1937, Amelia announced her most ambitious plan, a flight around the world following the equator. The plane, a Lockheed Electra. Her navigator, Fred Noonan. The stakes were immense. They took off from Miami in June 1937. The flight went smoothly. South America, Africa, India, Southeast Asia. They reached Lae, New Guinea, completing 22,000 miles. Only 7,000 remained. Their next destination, Howland Island, a tiny speck in the Pacific. On July 2, 1937, they took off. Radio contact was lost. The U.S. Navy searched for weeks. Nothing. No wreckage, no signal. She was gone. The vanishing fueled the legend. Did she crash and drown? Did she land and survive, stranded on a remote atoll? Was she captured by the Japanese? Did she change her name and live out her days in silence? No one knows. But perhaps that is the point. Amelia Earhart never found the edge of possibility because she never stopped pushing it. She wasn't perfect. She was a strategist, sometimes self-promoting, very private. But she was also brave, smart, precise. A woman who entered the most male-dominated space on Earth, aviation, and said, "Move over." She didn't live forever, but she became eternal. So sleep now, dear aviator. Let Amelia's story hover over your dreams, like the quiet drone of an engine of courage. Let her remind you that the sky is not a limit, it's an invitation, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is take off.
Frida Kahlo, the artist of pain and passion. Today, let us enter the bold and deeply personal world of Frida Kahlo, the artist whose canvases became a mirror to her soul. With every stroke of the brush, she transformed pain into poetry, suffering into strength, and life into an unbreakable current of color and emotion. Close your eyes and immerse yourself in a world where beauty and agony are intertwined, where flowers sprout through scars, and where self-expression knows no boundaries. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907, in Coyoacan, Mexico, in the house that would later be known as La Casa Azul, the Blue House. From a young age, she faced adversity. At 6, she contracted polio, which left her with a lifelong limp. But at age 18, her life was changed forever. A tragic bus accident shattered her body, breaking her spine, pelvis, ribs, and legs. Confined to bed for months, she found solace in painting. With a mirror installed above her bed, she became her own subject, beginning a journey of self-discovery through art. She once said, "I paint myself because I am so often alone, and because I am the subject I know best." Though pain became her constant companion, it never silenced her. Instead, it gave her a voice that spoke through vibrant colors, surreal imagery, and unambiguous honesty. Frida's art was raw, unfiltered, and intensely autobiographical. Unlike the grand murals of her contemporaries, she painted intimate portraits, saturated with symbolism, pain, and Mexican culture. Her works blended indigenous folklore, surrealism, and personal narrative, creating a style wholly her own. Through works like The Two Fridas and Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird, she laid bare her emotional and physical suffering, confronting love, loss, and identity fearlessly. She painted not for fame, but for survival, weaving her own story into every canvas with bold strokes and haunting detail. Frida's tumultuous relationship with Mexican muralist Diego Rivera became one of the most famous love stories in art history. He was 20 years her senior, a lifer thirst for notional bud that spoke through vibrant colors, surreal imagery, and unambiguous honesty. Frida's art was raw, unfiltered, and intensely autobiographical. Unlike the grand murals of her contemporaries, she painted intimate portraits, saturated with symbolism, pain, and Mexican culture. Her works blended indigenous folklore, surrealism, and personal narrative, creating a style wholly her own. Through works like The Two Fridas and Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird, she laid bare her emotional and physical suffering, confronting love, loss, and identity fearlessly. She painted not for fame, but for survival, weaving her own story into every canvas with bold strokes and haunting detail. Frida's tumultuous relationship with Mexican muralist Diego Rivera became one of the most famous love stories in art history. He was 20 years her senior, a lifer for her own skin. Frida's body never truly healed, and years of pain only intensified. She endured countless surgeries, her spine held by metal corsets, and her legs wrapped in bandages. Yet she refused to be defined by her suffering. Instead, she painted it. In The Broken Column, she stands alone, her torso split open, revealing a crumbling column in place of a spine. Nails pierce her skin. The face remains unflinching. She doesn't seek pity, she demands to be seen. Her paintings became her voice, screaming when she couldn't speak, standing straight when her body failed. Through vibrant colors, surreal images, and raw emotion, she transformed pain into power. Her suffering was undeniable. Nevertheless, she chose to dress in traditional Tehuana clothing, adorning herself with flowers and jewels, embracing her culture and identity despite the hardship. As her health declined, Frida became more politically active,
embracing communist ideals and finding solace in her Mexican roots. She continued to paint despite her worsening condition, even attending her last exhibition in 1953 while lying on a hospital bed, refusing to let infirmity steal her moment of triumph. In her final diary entries, she scrawled messages of resilience, writing, "Feet, what do I need you for if I have wings to fly?" Her defiance never faded, her artistry never dimmed. A year later, on July 13, 1954, she passed away at age 47. Her last diary entry read, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." Yet in every stroke of the brush, she remains. As our journey through Frida's world concludes, take one last look at her fearless self-portraits, her blooming flowers, her scars turned into stories. She once said, "I paint flowers so they will not die," and neither will she. Frida Kahlo is more than just an artist. She is an icon, a symbol of defiance, creativity, and resilience. Her paintings whisper to those who feel broken, reminding them that pain can be transformed into something beautiful, that even the deepest wounds can bloom. Tonight, may the spirit of Frida Kahlo inspire your dreams, filling them with color, passion, and the unbreakable will to create beauty even from the darkest moments. Sweet dreams, dear traveler of painted emotion.
Georgia O'Keeffe, the spirit of the desert and the flowers. Today, let us immerse ourselves in the boundless landscapes of Georgia O'Keeffe, an artist who saw the world with a vision unlike any other. Her sweeping desert horizons, monumental flowers, and bold use of color captured the essence of nature's quiet power. She was a woman of independence, resilience, and creativity, shaping modern art with her fearless brushstrokes. Close your eyes and enter her world, where petals unfold like whispers and the desert hums with eternal beauty. Georgia O'Keeffe was born on November 15, 1887, in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. From a young age, she saw the world differently, not in rigid details, but in fluid forms and deep colors. As a child, she wandered the open fields, captivated by the simplicity of nature, an influence that would later define her artistic style. In an age when women were expected to conform, Georgia chose a different path. She studied at the Art Institute of Chicago and the Art Students League of New York, but traditional methods never satisfied her. She sought to create something deeper, something that expressed the emotion, movement, and soul of nature. In the early 20th century, O'Keeffe's abstract charcoal drawings caught the eye of the photographer and gallery owner Alfred Stieglitz, who exhibited them in his New York gallery. Their artistic connection soon deepened into a profound love, and she moved to New York to be with him. With his encouragement, O'Keeffe explored new forms, moving from abstraction to natural imagery, painting the world as she felt it rather than how it looked. Her large-scale paintings of flowers became her signature, magnifying delicate petals into bold, commanding forms. Works like black iris and Jimson weed transformed the smallest details of nature into something grand and powerful. Critics debated their meaning, often interpreting them through the lens of femininity and sensuality, but O'Keeffe rejected such labels. "I paint what I see. I paint what I feel." Though New York brought her fame, it was the landscapes of the American Southwest that truly captured her heart.
In 1929, O'Keeffe first traveled to New Mexico, where the vast desert, red cliffs, and sun-bleached animal bones spoke to her in a way no city could. The endless horizons, the ever-changing sky, and the quiet, solitary beauty of the land became her refuge. She painted the desert not as an empty space, but as a place of motion, spirit, and life. Her series of cow skulls and dried mesas reflected both the fragility and the strength of the environment. She saw beauty in what others overlooked, in the bones, the parched landscapes, and the stark contrast of light and shadow. She eventually made New Mexico her permanent home, settling at her beloved Ghost Ranch, where she painted from sunrise to sunset, her only companions the earth and the wind. Georgia O'Keeffe was not just an artist, she was a pioneer in a male-dominated art world. She forged her own path, refusing to be categorized or defined by others. She was a woman who lived on her own terms, embracing solitude and finding inspiration in the wild, open spaces of the land. Even in her later years, as her eyesight began to fail, she continued to create, turning to sculpture and experimenting with different materials. Her passion for art never diminished, nor did her love for the natural world. She once said, "To see takes time." And through her art, she invited the world to truly see, to slow down, to feel, to immerse itself in the simple, profound beauty of the world. O'Keeffe continued to paint into her 90s, her legacy already cemented as one of the most influential modernist artists in history. She passed away in 1986 at the age of 98, leaving behind a body of work that forever changed the way we view nature, form, and color. Her flowers still bloom on the walls of museums. Her desert landscapes still breathe with life, and her spirit, independent, fearless, and profoundly connected to the world, lives on in every brushstroke she left behind. As our journey through O'Keeffe's world concludes, take one final look at the gentle folds of her flowers, the fiery hues of her deserts, the skies stretching endlessly overhead. She once said, "I found that I could say things with color and shapes that I had no words for." And so she spoke through her paintings, telling tales of solitude, resilience, and a love for the earth itself. Tonight, may the spirit of Georgia O'Keeffe inspire your dreams, filling them with endless open landscapes, soft petals, and the quiet power of a woman who saw the world in color and light. Good night, explorer of silent beauty.
Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady. Margaret Thatcher, the woman who brought a handbag to a knife fight. This story does not flow softly by candlelight or unfold on velvet chairs. It clicks with high heels on marble halls of Parliament in patent leather shoes. It speaks with sharp consonants, not lullabies. Now, we meet a woman who did not slide into power, but seized it. She was not a hero to all. She was not a villain to all. She was Margaret Hilda Thatcher. And for over a decade, she didn't just lead Britain, she redefined it. Love her or hate her, she left her fingerprints on everything from milk bottles to missile systems. So, let's rewind the clock, before the Iron Lady, before the speeches and the strikes, to a time when she was merely a grocer's daughter with perfect posture and eyes that never blinked. Margaret Thatcher was born Margaret Hilda Roberts on October 13, 1925, in Grantham, Lincolnshire, a humble market town with more Baptist chapels than movie theaters. Her father, Alfred Roberts, was a grocer and a lay preacher, and she would forever credit him with her moral compass and work ethic. He was conservative, frugal, fiercely independent. By day, he ran the corner shop, and by night, he served as mayor. He preached discipline and duty, and expected the same of his daughters. Margaret was not raised to dream. She was raised to achieve. She excelled in school, science, math, Latin. She wasn't fashionable, but she was focused. Other girls went to dances. Margaret joined debating societies. By age 17, she set her sights on Oxford, not just to attend, but to conquer. She arrived at Somerville College, Oxford, in 1943 to study chemistry. But even then, her true subject was power. While other students worried about the curriculum, Margaret was working to get into Parliament. By 1946, she was the president of the Oxford University Conservative Association, already speaking like a diminutive statesman. While most post-war students were leaning left, Margaret remained a staunch Tory, believing fiercely in personal responsibility and economic freedom. Her accent was precise, her manners impeccable, and her views sharp. She had no interest in softening herself. She once said, "If you want something said, ask a man. If you want something done, ask a woman." And she meant it. In 1951, she married Dennis Thatcher, a wealthy businessman and war veteran who didn't mind quietly standing beside a rising star. He supported her ambition and bankrolled her early political efforts. She ran for Parliament twice, unsuccessfully, the same year. But she did not give up. In 1959, she was elected as the Member of Parliament for Finchley. She had twins. She held her seat. She climbed. In 1970, in Edward Heath's government, she became the Secretary of State for Education and Science. And here, her first public controversy arose. She canceled a program that gave free milk to school children over the age of 7. The tabloids dubbed her Thatcher the Milk Snatcher. She was 45. The nation knew her name. In 1975, she did the unthinkable. She challenged Edward Heath for the leadership of the Conservative Party and won. She became the first woman to lead a major political party in the UK. The press didn't know what to do with her. Too prim to be relatable, too feminine to be traditional, too tough to be warm. But she did not flinch. She read policy papers at 5 a.m. She rehearsed speeches until her voice dropped an octave. She wore blue suits and brooches, and she carried her handbag like a weapon. The Soviet press dubbed her the Iron Lady. She loved it. In 1979, following a wave of strikes and an economic crisis, Margaret Thatcher became the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, the first woman ever to hold the office. She inherited a nation in chaos, inflation, unemployment, trade unions on fire. Her response? Thatcherism. Free markets, privatization, deregulation, and individualism over collectivism. She sold off state housing. She crushed the power of the trade unions. She cut government spending and raised interest rates. And she did it without blinking. To her supporters, she was a savior. To her critics, she was a destroyer. In April 1982, Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, a tiny British territory thousands of miles away. Many expected Britain to negotiate. Margaret sent the warships. 10 weeks later, Britain was victorious.
The victory revitalized national pride and skyrocketed her popularity. She became not just a prime minister, but a symbol, strong, relentless, unyielding. Her re-election was a landslide, but peace did not follow. She took on the National Union of Mine Workers, leading to the brutal miners' strike of 1984 to 1985, a vicious year-long confrontation that divided the country and devastated mining communities. She introduced the poll tax, a fiercely unpopular flat-rate local tax that sparked protests and riots. In 1984, she narrowly survived an IRA bombing at the Conservative Party conference in Brighton. She walked out unharmed and delivered her speech the next day. But cracks began to show. Her style, once refreshing, began to look dictatorial even to her allies. In 1990, she was finally ousted by her own party. She left Downing Street in tears. After stepping down, she wrote memoirs, lectured, and traveled the world. But in the 2000s, her health began to fail. Dennis died in 2003. She followed him in 2013, at the age of 87. Her funeral was attended by royalty, world leaders, and protesters alike. Her legacy is a battleground. To some, she saved Britain. To others, she broke it. She gave women a template for power, but not necessarily for sisterhood. She transformed the economy, but left scars on the social fabric that still ache. She wasn't warm, but she was real. And she taught an entire generation that you don't have to be liked to lead. So, now, dreamer, relax your mind. Let Margaret's heels click away into the distance, echoing through the century she changed. Let her remind you that ambition is not shameful, that power and femininity are not opposites, that power is not always gentle. Sleep now, little rebel, and awake with purpose.
Oprah Winfrey, the Queen of Truth. Oprah Winfrey, the woman who talked, listened, and changed everything. Now, dreamer, settle in. This story doesn't rush or thunder. It glows. It leans in close, looks you in the eye, and says, "You are not alone." Because tonight, we enter a history that began in silence and shame, but blossomed into power, purpose, and a platform that has touched millions. This is the story of Oprah Winfrey, a woman who rose from the dirt floor of a shack in Mississippi to become one of the most influential and beloved figures in the modern world. She did not inherit her place. She built it brick by brick, word by word. She became the queen of the talk show. But more than that, she became the queen of giving permission to cry, to question, to speak the truth. So tonight, let her story embrace you. Let it remind you that pain can be a beginning, not a burden. That a microphone is not the power. The power is what you speak into it that changes lives. Oprah Gail Winfrey was born on January 29, 1954, in Kosciuszko, Mississippi. Her beginning was rough, raw, unfiltered, and often painful. Born to a teenage mother, Vernita Lee, she was raised by her grandmother, Hattie Mae, in a home so poor that Oprah often wore potato sacks instead of dresses. There was no indoor plumbing, no bookshelves stacked with dreams, only survival. But her grandmother noticed something early. Oprah talked, endlessly, eagerly, with flair. By age 3, she was reciting Bible verses in church with the gravitas of a preacher. She wasn't just gifted, she was driven. She read constantly, devouring words and imagining a world beyond her surroundings. But as she grew, life became harder, much harder.
At age 9, Oprah was sexually abused by a family member and then by several other adults. For years, she carried the silence. The trauma shaped her, but it did not break her. At 14, after becoming pregnant and losing the baby, Oprah was sent to live with her father, Vernon Winfrey, in Nashville. And here something shifted. Vernon Winfrey was not warm, but he was structured. He insisted Oprah read a book a week, memorize scripture, stick to a schedule, and live up to high expectations. It was a tough love, but it gave her the rails she needed to run on. She excelled in school. She joined the speech team. She started to shine. At 17, she won a scholarship to Tennessee State University and studied communications. That same year, she became the first black female news anchor for WTVF-TV in Nashville. She was just getting started. Oprah's early years in journalism were not glamorous. She was shuffled around, asked to tone it down. One news director called her too emotional. But Oprah wouldn't adjust herself. She redirected her power. In 1976, she moved to Baltimore and became the co-host of People Are Talking. Suddenly, she had space to be herself, warm, curious, present. She wasn't just reporting the news, she was connecting with people. The connection was electric. In 1984, she moved to Chicago to host a low-rated morning show, AM Chicago. Within months, it shot to #1. A year later, it was renamed The Oprah Winfrey Show. National syndication followed. By 1986, Oprah wasn't just on TV, she was TV.
The Oprah Winfrey Show was not just entertainment. It was church. It was therapy. It was revolutionary. She brought to the center stage guests that daytime television ignored. Survivors of abuse, gay teenagers, people living with HIV, spiritual leaders, addiction counselors, everyday people with extraordinary stories. She shared her own trauma, cried with her guests, and sat in silence when silence was more powerful than words. She made people feel seen, and she was not afraid to go big. She interviewed Michael Jackson. She tackled race, religion, shame, and healing. She launched Oprah's Book Club, which turned unknown authors into bestsellers overnight. She brought Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth into living rooms across America, watching as people leaned into spiritual awakening. When she gave away cars, she wasn't just making a headline, she was creating moments people would never forget. But behind the scenes, she was also building. In 1988, Oprah founded Harpo Productions, Oprah spelled backward, becoming one of the first women and the first black woman to own and produce her own television show. She wasn't just a host, she was the boss. Under the Harpo umbrella, she produced movies, television series, magazines, and mentoring programs. She invested in the Oxygen Network, launched the Oprah magazine, and later the OWN cable channel, Oprah Winfrey Network. She became a billionaire, but more importantly, she became a template for women, for black entrepreneurs, for people who had been told no more times than they could count. Oprah wasn't perfect. She faced criticism for being too commercial, too spiritual, too influential, too much everything. She struggled with yo-yo dieting and talked openly about it. She didn't have children, and she was also candid about that. But she remained honest, human. That was her superpower. Her longtime partner, Stedman Graham, stood quietly beside her. They never married. Her best friend, Gayle King, she referred to as her chosen family. The public speculated endlessly, but Oprah never played the gossip game. She simply lived authentically, unapologetically.
In 2018, when she took the stage at the Golden Globes to accept the Cecil B. DeMille Award, she spoke of truth, of justice, of a new day on the horizon. The speech went viral. People called her to run for president. She didn't. She didn't need to. Oprah doesn't chase power. She is power. She wrapped The Oprah Winfrey Show in 2011 after 25 years and 4,561 episodes, but she did not disappear. She continued to mentor, produce, write, and teach. She opened the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy in South Africa, creating opportunities where there were none. Her legacy is not the ratings, but the conversation she started. It is the quiet moments of realization she sparked.
Oprah and Sally Ride, the sky as an invitation. She continued to provide a platform for voices others ignored. Meghan and Harry, trauma survivors, spiritual seekers, authors, and healers. She once said, "Turn your wounds into wisdom," and she has done so at every turn. Sleep now, dear dreamer. Let Oprah's story wrap around you like a soft blanket. A life that began in hardship, unfolded in truth, and ascended in brilliance. She reminds us that compassion is leadership, that vulnerability is not weakness, it is the door to real power, and that when you speak your truth, you give others permission to speak theirs. Close your eyes now. You are worthy. You are whole. You are not alone. Oprah would want you to remember that, and so would I. On June 18, 1983, millions of eyes turned skyward as the Space Shuttle Challenger launched from the Kennedy Space Center. Aboard it, clad in the same blue NASA jumpsuit as her male crewmates, sat a 32-year-old physicist with quiet eyes and a serious tone. As the engines roared and the shuttle lifted, the press focused not on the mission, not on the science, but on her. Would she cry? Could she cope? Did she pack makeup for orbit? Her name was Sally Ride, and she had no time for any of it. She was the first American woman in space, and she hated being introduced that way. Not because it wasn't true, but because it wasn't the point. For her, it wasn't about being first, it was about doing the job, understanding the math, piloting the damned shuttle. Everything else was noise. But whether she liked it or not, Sally Ride became a symbol. And by her quiet, focused way, she helped change the image of what it meant to be a woman in science. Not by slogans or spotlight seeking, but by showing up and doing her job brilliantly. Sally Kristen Ride was born on May 26, 1951, in Los Angeles, California. Her father was a political science professor, her mother a counselor and women's prison volunteer. It was a home filled with books, ideas, and a quiet encouragement that allowed a curious child to explore without limits. From a young age, Sally had two loves, science and tennis. She was gifted at both. In fact, as a teenager, she ranked among the country's best tennis players and even briefly considered a professional career. But ultimately, the pull of physics was stronger than the allure of the court. She attended Stanford University, earning degrees in English and physics, and then stayed to earn her PhD in physics in 1978. She was researching the interaction of X-rays with interstellar matter when she saw an advertisement in the student newspaper. NASA was recruiting astronauts, and for the first time, they were accepting women. Out of more than 8,000 applicants, Sally Ride was one of the 35 chosen. 6 of them were women. Ride was not a wide-eyed dreamer. She was pragmatic, razor-sharp, and focused on learning everything she could. From zero-gravity simulations to parachute training, she mastered the skills without fanfare. She was not the loudest person in the room, but she was one of the best.
NASA loved her coolness under pressure, her intellect, and her dry, witty humor. She joined the team in 1978 as part of NASA Astronaut Group 8, which was nicknamed the 35 New Guys. Despite the presence of 6 women, Sally didn't correct them. She just got to work. Her first big role came on the second and third shuttle missions, where she served as Capcom, the person on Earth who communicates with the orbiting astronauts. Her voice was heard by the pilots during re-entry, calm and unflappable. When it came time to select a crew for STS-7, the 7th shuttle mission and the second flight of Challenger, Sally was chosen as a mission specialist. This made her the first American woman in space. Yes, but she was not interested in being a media darling. She wanted to fly.
Nellie Bly, 72 days around the world. The media, of course, fixated on her gender, as if it mattered more than her training. In the lead-up to the launch, reporters asked her if spaceflight would affect her reproductive organs, if she planned to wear makeup in orbit, and if she would cry if something went wrong. Sally responded with cool deflection, and sometimes with devastatingly concise wit. When asked if she cried on the job, she countered, "Why don't you ask Rick, her male crewmate, if he cried?" She wasn't trying to be a feminist icon, she simply wanted to be taken seriously. But sometimes, simply doing your job well is the most radical thing you can do. On June 18, 1983, Challenger launched with a crew of 5. Ride became the 3rd woman in space, after Soviet cosmonauts Valentina Tereshkova and Svetlana Savitskaya, and the first American. She spent 6 days in orbit, deploying satellites, operating the robotic arm, conducting experiments, and quietly making history. Her crewmates adored her. The mission went off without a hitch. And when she returned to Earth, she did something rare. She backed away from the spotlight. NASA had hoped she would be the public face of the space program. Instead, she returned to training. She was selected for a second flight in 1984 and was training for a third until Challenger exploded in 1986 upon liftoff, killing all 7 crew members. Sally was devastated, and she was one of the few people who could truly understand the magnitude of the tragedy, not just emotionally, but mechanically. She was named to the Rogers Commission, the investigative board that looked into what went wrong. Unlike some, Sally did not grandstand. She listened, she read, and she quietly made sure that the critical engineering failures, the rubber O-rings, the warnings about cold weather, made it into the final report. Many credit her with ensuring the truth was not softened. After the investigation, Sally did not return to space, but her work was not over. In 1987, she left NASA and turned her focus to science education. She became a professor of physics at the University of California, San Diego. She co-founded Sally Ride Science, an organization dedicated to encouraging girls and young women into STEM careers. She wrote several science books for children, created space-themed educational materials, and gave lectures that never felt like performances, but were simply invitations to curiosity. She lived quietly, with integrity and grace. She never put her private life on public display. And in fact, it was not until her death in 2012 that the world learned she had spent the last 27 years of her life with her partner, Tam O'Shaughnessy. Their relationship was deep, devoted, and private. With this, Sally Ride also became the first known LGBTQ+ astronaut in U.S. history. But even in this, she made no statements, no parades, but simply existed, quietly, with dignity, as a woman who broke barriers because in the first place, she never believed in them. Sally Ride passed away from pancreatic cancer in 2012 at the age of 61. Tributes poured in from presidents, from NASA, from the students she had inspired. Her legacy is not just first woman in space, it is the quietly revolutionary role model who did not want to be one. Scientist, pilot, professor, partner, pioneer. She did not shout about her brilliance, she simply was brilliant.
She left behind a world where girls look at the stars and see possibility, where astronauts do not all look the same, where doing the job matters more than playing the part. So now, dear dreamer, drift gently. You are weightless now, as Sally once was, floating above the world, seeing it as a pale blue dot, full of hope, confusion, beauty, and unpiloted dreams. Let her remind you that you do not have to be loud to be brave. You do not have to take center stage to change the script. And sometimes, the most powerful voice is the one that speaks through action, not volume.
Nellie Bly, 72 Days Around the World. Nellie Bly, the girl who raced the world. Our story begins not with ships or swords, but with a name, or rather, a pseudonym. Nellie Bly was not born Nellie at all. She came into the world in 1864 in Cochrane's Mills, Pennsylvania, as Elizabeth Jane Cochrane. She was the 13th child, yes, the 13th, in a sprawling family, born just a year before the end of the U.S. Civil War. Her childhood was marked by loss. Her beloved father died when she was young, and financial hardship followed. By her teens, Elizabeth had a burning sense of injustice and a head full of opinions. But in Victorian America, a woman's voice was expected to be soft, pleasing, and preferably silent. Spoiler alert, she ignored that. In 1885, at just 20 years old, Elizabeth read a condescending column in the Pittsburgh Dispatch titled, "What Girls Are Good For." It argued that women's place was at home, not in the workplace. She responded with a scathing anonymous letter signed "Lonely Orphan Girl." The editor, stunned by her wit and righteous anger, published it and then offered her a job. It was then that she took her pseudonym, Nellie Bly, borrowed from a Stephen Foster song. Thus began a career that would rock journalism to its core. At first, she was given the typical women's section topics: flower shows, fashion, tea parties. But Nellie didn't drink tea. She seethed with ambition. She wanted to tell real stories, fight real battles, go where no woman had gone, not as a novelty, but as a journalist with a purpose. So she packed her bags, got on a train, and went to Mexico. Nellie spent several months in Mexico in the late 1880s, reporting on poverty, corruption, and government censorship. She reported on the lives of peasants, the grueling effects of dictatorship, and the contrast between beauty and brutality. Eventually, Mexican authorities threatened to arrest her, and she had to flee the country, but not before publishing a searing book, 6 Months in Mexico, that with fearless courage denounced despotism and injustice. She had tasted investigative journalism, and she was hooked. In 1889, Nellie pitched The New York World of Joseph Pulitzer, one of America's most influential newspapers. She had a wild idea. What if I pretend to be insane and get myself committed to an asylum to see what it's really like? Let that sink in. With no guarantees, she checked into a women's boarding house, acted erratically, and was quickly pronounced insane by doctors. Within days, she was forcibly committed to the Blackwell's Island Insane Asylum, one of the most notorious institutions in New York. There, Nellie saw and lived through atrocities: ice-cold baths and thin nightgowns, rotting food and physical abuse. Perfectly sane women locked up and ignored. Medical incompetence and cruelty masquerading as care. For 10 days, she was one of them. And then, just as she had hoped, the world pulled her out. When her report was published, it caused a national sensation. Her book, 10 Days in a Madhouse, led to major reforms in the treatment of the mentally ill. New York increased funding, improved conditions, and questioned how easily anyone, especially a woman, could be locked up simply for being inconvenient. Nellie was no longer just a reporter. She was a legend.
By 1889, Nellie had another dream. Inspired by Jules Verne's novel Around the World in 80 Days, she proposed a stunt. She would beat the fictional record, traveling solo around the globe with only a handbag and grit. Editors said, "But you're a woman. You'll need a chaperone. You'll take steamer trunks." She packed one bag, said goodbye, and boarded a steamer to London. In 72 days, she crossed oceans and continents by boat, train, rickshaw, and horse carriage. She battled delays, bought a monkey in Singapore. She met Jules Verne himself and traveled through France, Italy, Egypt, Sri Lanka, Hong Kong, and Japan.
Sacagawea, a bridge across the continent. Sacagawea, the pathfinder, with a baby on her back. Our story begins not in Washington, D.C. or Boston, but somewhere in the Wind River Mountains, in what is now Idaho, around 1788 or 1789. A girl was born into the Agadaika, Lemhi Shoshone tribe, a people known for their horsemanship, their knowledge of the Rocky Mountains, and their deep spiritual connection to the land. Her name was Sacagawea, meaning bird woman, though even that, like so much of her life, is shrouded in mystery and echoes. She grew up free under the wide sky, learning the plants, the animals, and the trails of her homeland. But when she was only around 12 years old, her childhood was stolen. During a raid by the Hidatsa, a rival tribe, Sacagawea was captured with other girls and taken hundreds of miles away to a village near what is now North Dakota. There she was held captive and, while still a teenager, was sold or won in a gambling game by Toussaint Charbonneau, a French-Canadian fur trader who took her as his wife. Her world was changed, but Sacagawea, dear dreamer, was not one to be broken. She learned new languages, Hidatsa and French, and held tightly to her Shoshone roots. And then came 1804. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson had made one of the boldest moves in U.S. history, the Louisiana Purchase, which doubled the young country's size. But no one really knew what had been purchased, what lay beyond the Mississippi. Mountains, deserts, dragons. Jefferson commissioned an expedition led by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to explore this vast new land, find a route to the Pacific Ocean, and make contact with indigenous peoples. It became known as the Corps of Discovery. By the fall of 1804, the expedition had built a fort near modern-day Bismarck, North Dakota, and they encountered Charbonneau, who introduced them to his very pregnant Shoshone wife. The moment Lewis and Clark realized she spoke Shoshone, they knew she was the key person they needed to get across the Rocky Mountains. They would need horses, and only the Shoshone knew those mountain passes. Sacagawea was not just a translator, she was the key to survival. And she joined them. At 16, 6 months pregnant. Let that sink in, dear dreamer. While most of us at 16 are figuring out our path, she was preparing to cross a continent with a baby on her back and history at her heels. On February 11, 1804, inside a frozen fort on the edge of the frontier, Sacagawea gave birth to a baby boy, Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau, nicknamed Pompey by Clark, who adored him. 2 months later, she strapped her newborn to her back and set out with 33 men, 2 captains, and destiny. They traveled by boat, horse, and foot across rivers, plains, and forests. Sacagawea translated, negotiated, foraged for food, and navigated through terrain she hadn't seen since childhood. And when one of the expedition's boats nearly capsized, she plunged in without hesitation, recovering precious journals, instruments, and supplies, all with a baby strapped to her back. The men were in awe. As the expedition approached the Bitterroot Mountains, they met the Shoshone, and Sacagawea was brought before the chief to translate. And in a twist so poetic it seems written by the stars, the chief was her brother,
Kamewait, whom she hadn't seen in years. There were tears, reunions, the past colliding with the present. Thanks to her, the Shoshone gave the Corps the horses they desperately needed. Without them, Lewis and Clark might have perished in the mountains. Thanks to her, the expedition continued. The journey was brutal, crossing snow-covered passes, surviving near starvation, and navigating treacherous rivers. But by November 1805, they reached the Pacific Ocean. They built Fort Clatsam on the Oregon coast and wintered there. And though Sacagawea had no vote, her opinion was asked for and respected, particularly when deciding where to camp or which route to take. She became more than a guide. She was a bridge, a calming presence, a sign to other Native groups that this was not a war party. Her presence alone, with a child, often averted conflict. And when they finally returned east in 1806, after more than 2 years of danger and wonder, the men received pensions and land. Sacagawea received nothing, officially at the time. Her story fades after the expedition. Some say she died young in 1812 at a trading post in South Dakota. Others claim she lived to an old age, returned to the Shoshone, and died in Wyoming in 1884. There are whispers of her biding new expeditions, learning to read and write, raising her son with pride. Her son, Jean-Baptiste, traveled to Europe, spoke several languages, and became a respected guide himself. But Sacagawea slipped into the mist of legend. Sacagawea's name was almost lost to history until America began to look back and see the story not just of men with maps, but of the woman who showed them where to go. Today, her name graces statues, rivers, coins, and schools. But more importantly, she represents the quiet, enduring magnificence of a woman who persevered, who led, who was seen, but not always celebrated. She did not carry a sword. She did not make demands. She simply walked, impossible step after impossible step, across a continent with a baby on her back and the world watching.
Michelle Obama, excellence as the standard. Michelle Obama, the first lady who took off the gloves and rolled up her sleeves. Let us walk through this one slowly. Not through a palace this time, not down a red carpet, but through city streets humming with life, basketball nets with torn ropes, family dinners loud with laughter, and a classroom where a girl in the back of the room raises her hand just a little too often. Tonight, we meet a woman whose story begins on the south side of Chicago, but whose journey reaches the White House, and yet still feels like she could be your cousin, your neighbor, your high school friend who always had it together. This is not a fairy tale of royalty. This is a tale of real, unvarnished resilience, real love, real power wrapped in a warmth that never once asked permission. This is Michelle LaVaughn Robinson Obama. She was born on January 17, 1964, in a cramped second-floor apartment on Euclid Avenue in a neighborhood that was already being whispered about. The South Side, too black, too poor, too easy to overlook. But inside the Robinson home, nothing felt small. Her parents, Fraser and Mariam Robinson, made sure of it. Fraser was a city water plant worker, dignified, humble, and wise. He had multiple sclerosis, walked with canes, and never once let it be an excuse. Marian was razor-sharp and observant, with the quiet strength of a woman who knew she was raising greatness. They had little money, but they had something better: structure, routine, books, respect. No nonsense. If Michelle and her brother Craig were late for dinner, the chairs stayed empty. If they brought home a B, the question wasn't why, it was what happened. Excellence wasn't a goal, it was a standard. Michelle was a doer from the start. She liked plans, structure, results. While other kids dreamed, Michelle executed. She took piano lessons from her great aunt in the apartment downstairs. She practiced endlessly.
That early discipline wrapped around her like armor and never left her. In school, she was exceptional. Not just smart, but motivated, relentless. She was the student who rewrote her notes in colored ink, who stayed up editing the essay when everyone else was sleeping. But this drive wasn't about perfection, it was survival. Because she saw how easily a girl like her could be written off. Black, working class, female, ambitious. The world didn't roll out red carpets for that combination. When a high school counselor told her she wasn't Princeton material, Michelle didn't cry. She applied. Then she went. Because Michelle does not take orders from low expectations. Princeton was a different world. White, elite, alienating. She didn't entirely fit in. She was acutely aware of her race, her background, the cultural codes she didn't know. But she studied sociology and African American studies because she wanted to understand the very systems that made her feel alienated. And again, she excelled. She graduated with honors. Next came Harvard Law School, the biggest stage. She entered knowing full well she would be one of the few black women in the room, and possibly the only one who couldn't lean on family wealth or Ivy League legacy. Nevertheless, she did brilliantly. Upon graduating, she joined a top Chicago law firm. Big desk, big salary, long hours. On paper, success. In her soul, restlessness. Then an intern walked in. Late, charming, disarming, with a name she couldn't quite remember. Barack Obama. She was supposed to be his mentor. He was supposed to learn from her. And he did. But she saw something more. Not just ambition, but vision. He spoke as if he meant it, thought deeply, dreamed bigger. And she, ever the pragmatist who measured life by checklists and resumes, found herself sliding towards something a little more messy. They fell in love. They married in 1992, and she made it clear this would not be a traditional marriage. Michelle liked to work. She needed her own identity. She wasn't going to become the political wife who smiles beside podiums and stays silent. As Barack's political star began to rise, Illinois Senate, then the U.S. Senate, then that audacious presidential run in 2008, Michelle was hesitant, not because she didn't believe in him, but because she knew the cost, the scrutiny, the time away, the racism, the attacks. Yet she stepped up with composure, with fire. And when Barack became the 44th President of the United States, she became the first black First Lady in American history. No pressure, right? Here is the twist. Michelle could have played it safe, smiled politely, stuck to the traditional First Lady script. Gardens, dresses, a few photo ops. Instead, she rewrote the role. She launched Let's Move, a national campaign to combat childhood obesity, not with lectures, but with dance parties, school garden makeovers, and collaborations with Beyoncé. She made vegetables cool. She launched Joining Forces, an initiative to support military service members and their families. She used her voice to advocate for girls' education globally, and she did it without playing by the rules. She wore dresses by young, often unknown designers. She dug in the White House garden in jeans. She gave advice that sounded like it came from your auntie. She wasn't afraid to talk about the racism they experienced, or the challenges of marriage, or how hard it was to juggle career and motherhood. She brought humanity to the most formal office in America. People saw themselves in her. That was her secret weapon. She was flawlessly successful, yet remained vulnerably real. After they left the White House in 2017, Michelle did not stop. Her memoir, Becoming, became one of the best-selling works of all time. Her stadium tour to promote the book felt more like a rock concert than a literary event. She continued to inspire, not as a politician, not as a celebrity, but as a person who had the courage to tell her story. She reminds us that your story does not end where your doubts begin. Your background does not define your future, and that no table is too small for too big a dream to sit at. So now, dear dreamer, close your eyes and picture yourself in a safe, cozy place. Let the voice of Michelle Obama ring out like a warm reminder to be yourself fully, without apology, is a form of leadership. The courage to be ambitious and the courage to be kind are not separate things. They are the same thing. Michelle Obama, final thoughts. No one had ever done it. She fiercely championed military families, educational opportunities for girls globally, and mentorship programs for underserved youth. She opened the White House doors to poetry readings, student gatherings, and girls who looked like her, black, nervous, curious, wide-eyed. And she gave speeches that burned through the marble. Remember the 2016 DNC speech? When they go low, we go high? It didn't just resonate, it stuck. It became a kind of cultural compass whispered in schools, protests, and homes. Michelle didn't shout, she didn't plead. She spoke calmly, clearly, cutting through the noise like a laser. But behind the scenes, it was hard. She was candid about it. The loneliness, the exhaustion, the resentment of always having to be more, prove more, smile more. Her memoir, Becoming, wasn't just a bestseller, it was a revelation. She wrote about miscarriage, about couples therapy, about imposter syndrome, about anger. And in doing so, she made millions of people feel less alone. Michelle didn't pretend to be perfect. She simply tried to be honest, and that was more radical than perfect could ever be. After leaving the White House in 2017, Michelle did not disappear. She expanded her outreach, books, tours, Netflix deals, podcasts, public appearances that feel more like sermons. Funny, smart, fiercely accurate, she continued to speak out, to lift others up, to challenge the system while walking inside it in heels and a jumpsuit. And yet, she is still Michelle from the South Side. She still says y'all, still rolls her eyes when necessary, still believes in making the children eat their greens, still fiercely protective of her daughters, Malia and Sasha, still human. And that is the whole point. So now, dear dreamer, as you settle in and the world outside goes quiet, keep her story close, not because she is flawless, but because she is real. Michelle Obama did not rise on glitter. She rose on grit. She didn't demand the seat, she earned it, and then she held the door open for everyone who followed. Katharine Hepburn, the Unconquered. Katharine Hepburn, the woman who refused to sit down like a lady. Now, dear dreamer, we're going to light a cigarette on a balcony overlooking old Hollywood. But we're not here for the studio tinsel and silver screen glamour. No, we're walking with the woman who broke the Hollywood mold and then used the pieces of it as coasters for her gin and tonic. Katharine Hepburn. Not Kate, not Kathy, Katharine with an A, thank you very much. A voice raspy, as if she'd swallowed a pack of New England winters. Cheekbones sharp as sarcasm. A walk? Not a sachet, not a glide, but more like a challenge thrown in your direction. Yet she didn't court attention. She simply didn't care what the world wanted from her. And of course, the world couldn't get enough of her. She was born on May 12, 1907, in Hartford, Connecticut, where the tea was strong and the girls were stronger. Her mother, Katharine Houghton Hepburn, was a suffragist and birth control advocate. Her father, Thomas Hepburn, was a urologist and public health pioneer. This was not a stuffy Victorian home. The Hepburns debated, argued, swam naked in the lake, and told their children, speak up. Little Katharine didn't stand a chance of being normal. Thank God. She was athletic, wild, unfiltered. She climbed trees, cropped her hair like a boy, and once dragged her younger brother around by his sweater collar, pretending he was a sled dog. Her imagination was fierce and fantastical. Her confidence was already overdeveloped, like a muscle no one told her not to use. Then, at age 13, tragedy struck. She found her brother Tom dead, an accidental hanging while playing with a makeshift noose. Her grief was complex, heavy, and intensely private. For years, she used his birthday as her own. For years, she closed herself off from the world. But the theater slowly drew her back out, and the stage, predictably, couldn't contain her. She attended Bryn Mawr College, not because she dreamed of a degree, but because her parents insisted she stop moping and do something. She studied philosophy, briefly flunked out, came back. But the real education was the campus theater, where she learned that audiences listened when she didn't act nice. After graduation in 1928, she took the usual route for aspiring actresses: rejections, humiliation, understudy roles, nervous breakdowns. She was once fired from a play and rehired 3 days later because the replacement couldn't match her strange, electric energy. That was the thing about Catherine. Directors never knew what she was doing, but they knew it worked. Broadway led to Hollywood, and Hollywood, being itself, immediately didn't know what to do with her. She didn't wear makeup. She wore trousers. She snapped back. She wouldn't pose for cheesecake photos. She didn't wear a bra. She was too smart, too thin, too angular, too Hepburn. Her big break came in Morning Glory, 1933, where she played an ambitious actress with such conviction that one had to wonder if she realized it was just a role. She won her first Oscar, shoved it in a drawer, and kept going. Over the next decade, she played strong women with spines like telephone poles and hearts hidden under 3 layers of irony. But then her career faltered. A trade paper labeled her box office poison in 1938. Too cold, they said, too aloof, not relatable enough. And what did Catherine do? She bought out her studio contract, retreated to Broadway, found a role tailor-made for her, Tracy Lord in the Philadelphia Story. And when she sold the film rights to MGM, she insisted she star in it. They grumbled. She smirked. And then she starred alongside Cary Grant and James Stewart and absolutely owned the damn film. It was the comeback to end all comebacks. Now, let's talk about Spencer. Spencer Tracy, the slow burn love of her life. They met in 1941 on the set of Woman of the Year. Sparks? Yes. Drama? Definitely. Public awareness? Absolutely not. Spencer was married, a devout Catholic, and emotionally unavailable. Catherine, famously private, never tried to fix him. She loved him as he was, difficult, complex, alcoholic, deeply talented. They were opposites. He was quiet and brooding. She was bright and brassy. But they connected. Their on-screen chemistry was legendary. Off-screen, it was quieter. She cared for him as his health failed, even put her career on hold to nurse him as he aged. When he died in 1967, she grieved in private. They were together off and on for 26 years. She never remarried, never had children, and seemed never to regret it. She once said, "I would have been a terrible mother." And somehow, in that brutal honesty, she earned even more respect. Her film career spanned 6 decades. 6! She won 4 academic awards for Best Actress, which is still a record. She starred in classics like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, The African Queen, The Lion in Winter, and On Golden Pond. She worked into her 70s and 80s, that fierce energy still flashing behind her sharp gaze. She rarely gave interviews, and when she did, she mostly mocked them. She had no patience for fools, fakes, or tinsel. She never wore makeup off-screen, drove herself, kept her Oscars in a cupboard near her sink, and once left a dinner party because someone tried to take her photo. The mystique wasn't manufactured, it was just her. In her later years, she finally softened a bit. She gave a few interviews, spoke of her life with a dry humility. She tended her garden, fed squirrels by hand. She once described death as the next great adventure. She died on June 29, 1903, at the age of 96, in the home she loved in Connecticut. No fanfare, no fuss, just gone. But her legacy, oh dreamer, her legacy is smoking a cigarette and still refusing to wear a skirt. She gave women a template for unapologetic brilliance. She showed that femininity could be fierce, not faked, that glamour didn't need glitter, that you could be solitary and still whole. Actresses still try to capture what she had. But here is the truth. You cannot replicate Hepburn. You can only be inspired by her. And now, as the light dims on this chapter, take her with you into your dreams, not as a diva or a dame, but as a force of nature who did not bend, did not beg, and did not blink. Perhaps tomorrow you'll speak a little louder, walk a little straighter, wear what makes you feel like yourself, not what is expected, because the world has enough quiet girls. What it needs is a little more Hepburn.
Marie Curie, the radiant pioneer. Marie Curie, the radiant pioneer. Let us walk beside the woman who broke barriers and illuminated the world, both literally and figuratively. The journey of Marie Curie is one of persistence, brilliance, and an unwavering devotion to science. As you settle in, let the warmth of her legacy softly light your path. Humble beginnings in Poland. Even the smallest spark can ignite a bright flame. Maria Sklodowska, known to the world as Marie Curie, was born on November 7, 1867, in Warsaw, Poland. The youngest of 5 children, she grew up in a family steeped in books, intellectual discussion, and a love for learning. Her father was a math and physics teacher, and her mother was a school director. But Marie's early life was not without hardship. The family struggled financially, and tragedy struck when her mother died of tuberculosis when Marie was just 10. Despite the pain, Maria found solace in her studies. She excelled in school, driven by an insatiable curiosity and a dream of higher education. A dream that was not easily achieved for women in 19th century Poland. Russian-ruled Poland placed restrictions on women's access to education, but Marie was determined. She attended a secret underground school known as the Flying University, where women could learn in defiance of the oppressive system. There, her passion for science deepened, and she vowed to seek greater opportunities abroad. A new life in Paris, where determination meets opportunity, greatness is born. In 1891, at age 21, Marie moved to Paris to study at the prestigious Sorbonne. The transition was hard. She lived in a small, unheated apartment and often survived on little more than bread and tea. But the hardship did not stop her. She immersed herself in her studies, earning degrees in physics and mathematics. It was during this time that she met Pierre Curie, a physicist whose gentle demeanor and brilliant mind captivated her. They quickly formed a connection, bonded by mutual respect and a shared love for science. They married in 1895 and became not only life partners, but also research partners who would change the course of history. The discovery of radioactivity. When curiosity leads, the world follows. Marie and Pierre began their research into radioactive elements inspired by the recent discovery of X-rays and the mysterious radiation emitted by uranium. They worked tirelessly in a makeshift laboratory, often under grueling conditions, crushing and processing tons of pitchblende to isolate the source of this strange energy. In 1898, their efforts paid off. The Curies discovered two new elements, polonium, named after Marie's native Poland, and radium, which emitted an intense luminous glow. The term radioactivity was coined to describe the phenomenon they had uncovered. Marie's meticulous experiments proved that radioactivity was not the result of chemical reactions, but an intrinsic property of certain elements. This breakthrough revolutionized the fields of physics and chemistry, opening the door for new scientific advancements and medical applications. The Nobel achievement, when recognition follows tireless dedication. In 1903, Marie and Pierre Curie, along with Henri Becquerel, were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for their joint research into radioactivity. Marie became the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, smashing barriers in the male-dominated scientific community. But even as she celebrated this monumental achievement, tragedy struck. In 1906, Pierre was killed in a street accident, leaving Marie devastated. She grieved deeply, but found solace in continuing the work they had started together. With resilience and resolve, she took over Pierre's teaching post at the Sorbonne, becoming the first woman to teach at the prestigious university. Her research did not stop. In 1911, she was awarded a second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry, for her discovery of radium and polonium and her work in isolating pure radium. To this day, she remains the only person to win Nobel Prizes in two different scientific fields. A legacy of healing, science in service of humanity. During World War I, Curie saw an opportunity to apply her discoveries to medicine. She developed mobile X-ray units known as petites curies, little curies, which were used on the battlefield to help doctors locate bullets, shrapnel, and fractures in wounded soldiers. With her daughter Irene by her side, she trained radiologists and personally supervised the deployment of over 200 mobile units. Her work during the war saved countless lives and demonstrated her belief that science must be in service of humanity. Even in the face of danger, Curie remained devoted to her mission, often exposing herself to high levels of radiation without fully understanding its long-term effects. A quiet yet radiant end. Even as her health faded, her light continued to burn. Decades of exposure to radioactive materials took a toll on Curie's health. She developed aplastic anemia, a condition linked to prolonged radiation exposure. Despite her declining health, she continued her work, driven by her passion for discovery. Marie Curie passed away on July 4, 1934, at the age of 66. She was buried next to Pierre in a simple grave. But in 1995, their remains were transferred to the Pantheon in Paris, a mausoleum reserved for France's most distinguished figures. She was the first woman interred there on her own merit. Her legacy is immeasurable. Her discoveries paved the way for advances in cancer treatment, nuclear energy, and medical imaging.
Institutions, schools, and research centers around the world bear her name, paying homage to a woman who refused to let societal norms dim her light. She once said, "One never notices what has been done, one can only see what remains to be done." Those words, like her life, remind us to keep pushing forward.
Hypatia, the last light of ancient knowledge. In the bustling city of Alexandria, where the greatest minds of antiquity converged, a brilliant woman came to the forefront in the 4th century CE. A woman who would become one of the most famous mathematicians, astronomers, and philosophers of her time. Her name was Hypatia, and through her wisdom, courage, and dedication to knowledge, she would be celebrated as one of the last great scholars of the ancient world. Few figures in history embodied the pursuit of truth and reason like Hypatia. In a time when political and religious turmoil threatened intellectual freedom, she stood firm as a beacon of knowledge, exploration, and fearless thought. Born around 360 CE, Hypatia was the daughter of Theon of Alexandria, a respected mathematician and philosopher. Unlike most girls of her time, she was encouraged to study, explore, and think critically. Her father recognized her extraordinary potential and tutored her in mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy, ensuring she would not merely inherit knowledge, but advance it. As a young scholar, Hypatia traveled the Mediterranean, studying in Athens and Rome, where she became deeply versed in Neoplatonism, a school of thought that emphasized reason, the pursuit of truth, and the connection between mathematics and the divine. By the time she returned to Alexandria, Hypatia had become one of the most learned minds of her time, and her influence soon extended far beyond her city. Hypatia became the head of the Platonic school of Alexandria, where she taught mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. Unlike many of her contemporaries, she did not teach in secret. Her lectures were open to all, and she drew students from across the empire, regardless of gender or background. Her pupils described her as a gifted orator, a patient teacher, and a seeker of truth. She wrote extensively, though much of her work has been lost to time. Some of her contributions include commentaries on Euclid's Elements. She clarified and expanded upon the foundational text of geometry, making it more accessible to future scholars. Astronomical observations. Hypatia was instrumental in improving the design of the astrolabe, an early instrument used for mapping stars and calculating celestial movements. Mathematical advancements. She contributed to the development of algebra and number theory, shaping the course of mathematical progress. Her influence was so great that even Roman governors and political leaders sought her counsel, recognizing her wisdom and impartial judgment. But her prominence also made her a target. The early 5th century was a time of immense political and religious conflict. Christianity had become the dominant force in the Roman Empire, and tensions between pagans, Christians, and political factions in Alexandria were at a breaking point. Hypatia, while not a political figure, was viewed as a symbol of classical learning and scholarly inquiry, values that were increasingly viewed with suspicion by radical Christian factions. She had close ties to Orestes, the Roman governor of Egypt, who was in direct conflict with Cyril, the powerful bishop of Alexandria. Rumors spread that Hypatia was a pagan witch, a heretic, and an enemy of Christianity. Mobs, fueled by fanaticism, accused her of corrupting young minds and resisting the faith. In 415 CE, Hypatia was ambushed by a violent mob while riding through the city. She was dragged from her chariot, taken to a church, and brutally murdered. Her death signaled the end of an era, the symbolic fall of Alexandria's great intellectual tradition, as religious extremism overtook the city that had once been the heart of knowledge. Though her life was cut short, Hypatia's legacy endured. She became a symbol of wisdom, reason, and the quest for knowledge,
inspiring countless generations of scientists, philosophers, and mathematicians. Her story reminds us that intellectual freedom is fragile and that the pursuit of truth often comes at a high price. Today, Hypatia is celebrated as a martyr for science and reason, a woman who defied ignorance with enlightenment, fear with inquiry, and superstition with logic. Her name is immortalized on craters on the moon, asteroids in space, and institutions dedicated to science and learning. She lives in the equations she clarified, the minds she inspired, and the courage she embodied. Mother Teresa, the woman who found God in the gutter. Today, dear dreamer, we walk barefoot down narrow alleys lined with rusted tin and dust. We hear the moans of the sick, the whisper of prayer, the rustle of a cotton sari pulled taut over a weary shoulder. There are no spotlights here, only flickering faith and the heavy smell of suffering. But in the center of it all, calm, tiny, determined, stands a woman in white and blue. Not a queen, not a scholar, not an icon of luxury, but perhaps the most recognizable woman in the world. She was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, spoke softly, Albanian by birth, Indian by choice, global by vocation. She owned no property, had no children, and no home of her own. Yet she moved presidents, popes, and people of every faith. This was Mother Teresa, and this is her story. She was born as Agnes Gongsha Bajakciu on August 26, 1910, in Skopje, in what is now North Macedonia, then part of the Ottoman Empire. Gongsha means flower bud in Albanian. Sweet, isn't it? Her family was deeply Catholic, ethnically Albanian, and reasonably comfortable. Her father, Nikola, was a businessman and a bit of a political stirrer. He supported Albanian independence and regularly fed the poor. But when Gongsha was just 8, he suddenly died. Some say he was poisoned for his activism. The loss shook her world. Her mother, Dranafile, became the rock, raising 3 children alone, always with dignity, prayer, and an open door. Their home was famous for its generosity. Even if you have to go without, you don't refuse the poor, her mother would say. This was the soil that rooted young Gongsha: loss, faith, service. By age 12, she felt the first stirrings of a religious calling. By 18, it was undeniable. She left home forever to join the Sisters of Loreto, an Irish order of nuns with missions in India. She took the name Sister Teresa after Thérèse of Lisieux, the Little Flower, a saint known for her humble, quiet path to holiness. After training in Dublin, she sailed for India, a continent away from everything she knew. No fanfare, just a calling. In 1929, she arrived in Calcutta, and here the real story begins. Mother Teresa, the call to service. Not from a distance, not through charity galas, but directly, with her own hands, with her own body. She fought for permission for a year, left the security of the Loreto order, and exchanged the traditional habit for the simple white cotton sari with blue stripes worn by poor Indian women. With no money, no support, and no building, only faith, she started. She learned basic medicine, ministered to the sick in the streets, washed open wounds, and comforted the dying. Her first student, a child writing in the dirt with a stick. People thought she was crazy, a European woman living in the slums, mad. But others slowly followed. In 1950, she founded the Missionaries of Charity. Its mission: to care for the hungry, the naked, the homeless, the crippled, the blind, the lepers. All those people who feel unwanted, unloved, forgotten. Her only qualification? Compassion. For decades, the missionaries of charity grew exponentially. Homes for the dying, orphanages, leprosy colonies, AIDS hospices, soup kitchens, all run by nuns in the identical humble saris, often without pay, without sleep, without complaint. Mother Teresa became a global symbol of selflessness and service, and yet she remained controversial. Let us not pretend that holiness is easy. Critics pointed to conditions in some of her homes: unhygienic, lacking pain medication, overly focused on suffering rather than healing. They questioned her alliances with dictators, with dubious donors. They bristled at her opposition to abortion, contraception, and divorce. Even in dire circumstances, she was not progressive. She was not a politician. By her own admission, she was a Catholic first, and a Catholic always. But here is what cannot be ignored. She showed up every day for the maggot-infested wounds, the starving babies, the dying men that no one else would touch. She gave them dignity, a hand to hold, a face that didn't flinch. You do not have to agree with her theology to see the radical act in that. And then her secret. After her death, letters were released, a private, candid, private correspondence with spiritual counselors. In them, Mother Teresa confessed to decades of spiritual darkness. She wrote of feeling abandoned by God, of praying and hearing nothing, of smiling while feeling empty inside. "There is so much contradiction in my soul," she wrote, and she continued to serve. Imagine, the woman the world saw as a living saint felt desolate. But she never stopped, because her faith, however tested, was never a show. It was her backbone. She received countless honors: the Nobel Peace Prize in 1979, India's Bharat Ratna, America's Presidential Medal of Freedom. Streets, stamps, and statues were made in her image. And yet she always deflected the praise. "It is his work," she would say. "I am but a pencil in his hand." She died on September 5, 1997, at age 87. Her body was laid to rest in India, the nation that claimed her as its own. 6 years later, she was beatified by Pope John Paul II. In 2016, she was canonized as Saint Teresa of Calcutta. But dreamer, the titles do not matter. She never chased sainthood. She chased pain, followed it, found it, knelt beside it. Whether you see her as a saint or a complicated human being, her life was a rebellion against indifference. So now, as you settle into the silence, think of her, the tiny woman in a sari, the hands that washed the dying, the smile that sometimes cost her everything. Let her remind you that compassion is not clean, that faith doesn't always feel good, that service is not glamorous, but also that love, when chosen over and over, can become something holy.
Emmeline Pankhurst, Deeds, Not Words. Emmeline Pankhurst, the woman who refused to wait her turn. Picture a woman pacing a jail cell floor, her corset laced tight, her jaw set. Her hands are stained with ink from writing speeches. Her body is bruised from being dragged by the law she sought to rewrite. This is not a story of gentle whispers or petitions passed hand to hand. No, this is the story of a woman who kicked and screamed history forward into modernity. Her name was Emmeline Pankhurst, and she did not ask for change, she demanded it. She marched in long skirts through police lines. She launched hunger strikes that left her hollow-eyed but unbroken. and she led a movement that dragged women from the shadows to the ballot box. Let's rewind, dreamer, to the beginning, before the protests, before the prisons, to where the fire was kindled. Emmeline was born Emmeline Golden on July 15, 1858, in Moss Side, Manchester, into a large family that believed in social reform but still expected their daughters to marry well and behave. Her parents, Robert and Sophia Golden, were educated and politically engaged. He was a liberal radical. She was a quiet feminist in an era where there was barely a word for it. Their home was filled with talk of progress, but the practical application of equality stopped at the doorstep. While Emmeline's brothers were groomed for law and politics, she was taught piano and domestic science. Yet she was different, more flame than flower. At just 14, her mother took her to her first suffragette meeting. She listened as a woman spoke, firm, eloquent, uncompromising. And something clicked. She left that meeting not with stars in her eyes, but with a mission rooted in her bones. It was her first taste of the movement. She did not forget it. Though she craved deep learning, Emmeline's education was constrained by Victorian expectations. She attended the École Normale in Paris, a finishing school with a progressive bent, where she soaked up not just French and social graces, but revolutionary fervor. She learned about the French Revolution, about the women who marched for bread and burned palaces, and she returned to England with a broader view and less patience. Back home in Manchester, she immersed herself in social issues. She volunteered, organized, listened, and took notes. She married young, but not blindly. Her husband was not a conventional match. In 1879, at age 21, Emmeline married Dr. Richard Pankhurst, a barrister famous for writing radical legislation, including the Married Women's Property Act, which allowed women to own property for the first time. He was twice her age and twice as radical as most men she knew. Theirs was a marriage of ideals and activism. They were partners in every sense. He believed in her intellect, supported her forthrightness, and never asked her to shrink. She bore 5 children, editing speeches while nursing babies and opening their home to political debate and restless young minds. Richard's unwavering belief in women's equality strengthened her. He gave her space to dream, but the cause was still inching along. For years, Emmeline helped behind the scenes, chairing meetings, organizing rallies, pouring tea while the men spoke. But she was watching, waiting, gathering fuel. When Richard died in 1898, Emmeline mourned him, and then she stood up. In 1903, fueled by frustration and fire, she founded the Women's Social and Political Union, WSPU. Its motto, deeds, not words. The time for polite persuasion was over. This was a movement that dared. They organized rallies, disrupted Parliament, chained themselves to fences, smashed windows, and set fire to post boxes. Emmeline called it the argument of the broken pane of glass. The WSPU was women-only, fiercely independent, and absolutely militant. Emmeline and her daughters, Christabel, Sylvia, and Adela, were central figures. They trained their voices, mastered the press, dressed impeccably while remaining utterly impossible to ignore. When Emmeline was first arrested, she held her head high. She knew that the image of a well-dressed woman being dragged by the police was theater, and it worked. Women began to join by the thousands. Between 1908 and 1914, the campaign escalated into a full-scale war with the establishment. Suffragettes were arrested again and again. In prison, they launched hunger strikes. The government's answer? Force-feeding. Imagine. Women tied to chairs, tubes shoved down their throats, milk and eggs pumped into their bodies as punishment. Emmeline was arrested over a dozen times. Each time she emerged thinner, angrier, and more determined. She saw the system for what it was, not broken, but built to exclude women,
and she wasn't playing along anymore. The media demonized her, Parliament feared her, the public was divided. She didn't care. She once said, "We are here not because we are lawbreakers, we are here in our efforts to become lawmakers." But not all the battles were with the government. Some were personal. Her daughter, Sylvia, a socialist and pacifist, felt the WSPU excluded working-class women and ignored broader injustices. Emmeline, focused on the single goal, the vote, saw everything else as a distraction. They fought fiercely. Sylvia was expelled from the WSPU. Their rift never fully healed. Adela also broke away, eventually emigrating to Australia. Christabel remained closest to her mother, becoming the strategic leader, but even they struggled under the weight of expectation. Emmeline was many things, but easy was never one of them. When World War I broke out in 1914, Emmeline shocked her followers. She announced a cessation of militant suffragette activities and urged women to support the war effort. It was a deeply divisive move, but Emmeline believed that proving women's patriotism would earn public sympathy and political leverage. Women flooded the factories, drove ambulances, and worked in hospitals. And for many, the experience of working and surviving without men changed everything. In 1918, women over the age of 30 who met property qualifications finally won the right to vote. It was not enough, but it was something. In 1928, Parliament passed the Equal Franchise Act, giving all women over the age of 21 the same voting rights as men. By then, Emmeline was in fragile health, but she lived long enough to see her mission accomplished. She died just weeks later, on June 14, 1928. Her funeral was massive, her coffin draped in purple, white, and green. Suffragettes, old, frail, but still fierce, marched behind her, their medals pinned to their drooping lapels. She had won, not easily, not perfectly, but undeniably. Emmeline Pankhurst did not play by the rules. She broke them, rewrote them, and gave them back to history, stamped with her initials. She made enemies, alienated allies, but she changed the world. She taught generations of women that power is never given, it is taken, loudly, without apology. Her face is now carved in stone outside the Houses of Parliament, a place she was once banned from entering. Her name, once cursed in headlines, is now lauded in textbooks. And the vote she fought, starved, and bled for, that is now your birthright, dreamer. Your right to use, your right to protect. So rest now, gentle rebel. The march is quiet tonight, but the echo remains. In every signature, every protest, every no that means I matter. Emmeline didn't wait her turn, she created her turn.
Ada Lovelace, The Poetry of Algorithms. Ada Lovelace, the visionary who wrote the future before it existed. Now we dive into a world powdered with lace and soot, where horses clip-clop past gaslights and salons hum with philosophical gossip. A time when steam powered the present and imagination dared to look toward the future. We visit a woman who saw that future more clearly than anyone around her and whispered it into equations. A countess, a poet, a mathematician, a dreamer who looked at a machine of gears and cogs and saw not just calculation, but music, art, and intelligence. She didn't just write the code, she wrote the idea of code. And she did it before computers were even born. Tonight, we dream with Ada. Augusta Ada Byron was born on December 10, 1815, in London, to a poet and a problem. Her father was Lord Byron, the scandalous romantic poet known for seducing half of Europe and writing poetry with the emotional restraint of a sea storm. Her mother, Lady Annabella Milbank, was his complete opposite: cold, calculating, deeply intellectual, and determined to crush even the whisper of Byron's chaos in their child. The marriage lasted barely a year. After Ada's birth, Annabella left her husband, taking baby Ada and never allowing her to see him again. Lord Byron sailed off to Greece and died when Ada was 8, leaving behind no paternal wisdom, only a shadow and a legend to rebel against or live up to. Meanwhile, Annabella had a mission: no poetry, no madness, no wildness. She saturated Ada's life with numbers, logic, and geometry. She hired strict tutors and insisted on discipline. Under this regime, Ada was fluent in mathematics by the time most children were still struggling to tell time. But you cannot breathe the poetry out of a Byron. It just goes underground. As a teenager, Ada began to develop what she called poetical science, a way of thinking that merged structure and imagination. Where others saw numbers as fixed, she saw them dancing, moving, singing. At 17, she met Charles Babbage, an eccentric, brilliant inventor who was working on a machine called the difference engine, a mechanical calculator capable of solving complex equations with gears and levers. Babbage, like many men of the era, was not known for taking women seriously. But Ada walked into his drawing room, listened to him explain his invention, and then asked a question so good, so sharp, that he actually shut up. From that moment, he called her the Enchantress of Number. This is where the beautiful part begins. In 1842, Babbage was working on plans for an even more ambitious machine, the analytical engine. This was not just a calculator, but a theoretical machine that could follow instructions, a mechanical device that could take an input, process it through a set of operations, and deliver an output, essentially a computer. Ada was captivated. She translated an Italian article about the machine into English, but then added a series of notes, long, detailed, brilliant, wildly speculative notes. One of those notes, Note G, contained what is now considered the first computer program, an algorithm intended to be processed by a machine that didn't even exist yet. She was writing not just about numbers, but about the potential of such a machine. She envisioned it composing music, creating images, manipulating symbols. While most of the world could not imagine machines doing anything but math, Ada Lovelace foresaw the digital age. And yet, of course, she was not celebrated. Her work was quietly set aside. She wasn't publicly rejected. To be that, she would have had to be taken seriously first. She was simply ignored. She died young, at 36, from uterine cancer, the same age as her infamous father. She asked to be buried next to him, not because she knew him, but perhaps because she understood him. Or maybe, deep down, she wanted to reclaim the poetical legacy she had been denied, not with verse, but with vision. Her papers faded into obscurity. For over a century, her genius lay dormant, unread by the very world she tried to address. It was only in the 1950s, when actual computers finally began to emerge, that Ada's work was rediscovered. Stunned researchers found her notes and realized she had predicted it all. In retrospect, she was the first programmer, the first coder,
the godmother of every algorithm that is quietly running on your phone right now. So why does her story matter, dear dreamer? Why should it lull you with wonder, rather than just fade into another tale of forgotten brilliance? Because Ada Lovelace didn't just understand machines, she imagined what they could be. She blended logic and art, calculation and creativity. She stood at the intersection of two worlds and said, "Why not both?" Let her remind you that being too much, too curious, too dreamy, too technical, too poetic is exactly what the future needs. So as your eyelids grow heavy and your breath slows and falls into a rhythm, picture her sitting by candlelight, fingers stained with ink, diagrams spread on the table. The woman writing the future in longhand before it even had a name. Not with the force of empire, not with celebrity, but with vision.
Rosalind Franklin, photograph 51. Rosalind Franklin, the woman who saw the secret of life. Let your thoughts drift to the quiet hum of a 1950s laboratory where chalk dust dances in the air like snowflakes of intellect, and a light bulb flickers slightly as if it too is deep in contemplation. There, beneath a lens, shrouded in a lab coat and silence, sits a woman looking at what most people will never truly comprehend, the structure of life itself. Her name is Rosalind, not a flashy name, not a flirtatious one, a name you might overlook in a crowd, but not here, not tonight. Tonight, she is our guide through the double helixes, the smoky X-rays, and the quiet ache of unrecognized genius. Let's slide back through the years, as if spooling back a film made of atoms and ambition. Rosalind Elsie Franklin was born on a soft spring day, July 25, 1920, in Notting Hill, London. It was a time of gaslights and a city still vibrating from the echoes of World War I. She came into the world with a sharp gaze and a sharper potential, the second of 5 children in a well-off Anglo-Jewish family. Her father, Ellis, was a banker, sober and serious, and her mother, Muriel, was one who believed that manners and microscopes both had their place. The Franklins were not a loud family, but they were steadfast, thoughtful, well-read. Even as a child, Rosalind disliked make-believe or idle chatter. She preferred order, logic. She could be found dissecting the inner workings of things while other girls fussed with dolls. Her teachers noted her precision. Her intellect was not the kind that bounced excitedly off the walls. It was a quiet intellect, the kind that sits back, observes, and understands the rules before you even know she is in the room. By the time she was a teenager, her path was already forming, like a crystal lattice under a microscope. She attended St. Paul's Girls' School, one of the few elite institutions of the time where girls were actually taught the sciences. Imagine that, an environment where she wasn't told to smile more or marry well, but was instead encouraged to look deeper, to think sharper. She thrived. Then came Cambridge, or more accurately, Newnham College. The early 1940s, and the world was at war again. But inside the quiet halls of the university, Rosalind was fighting her own battle, a war against assumption, against the complacency of male academics, and against the soft barriers that always seemed to stand between a woman and her place in the scientific record. At Cambridge, she studied physical chemistry, a kind of shade when you say physical chemistry, like it means nothing to you or to anyone else other than that. But for Rosalind, it was beautiful. Structures, reactions, equations. It was the architecture of reality, and she wanted to live inside them. After graduating, she pursued doctoral research on coal and carbon at Cambridge University. And then, a strange thing happened. World War II opened a few unexpected doors. Industry needed smart minds, regardless of gender. She began working at the British Coal Utilization Research Association. Yes, it sounds boring, but stick with me. There, she did groundbreaking work on the microstructure of carbon. Carbon, that stubborn little element that sits at the heart of all life, every diamond, every pencil. Rosalind came to know it like an old friend. She earned her PhD in 1945. Now let's pause for a second. She is in her 20s, she has a PhD, and she is already publishing serious work. You would think the world would be falling over itself to hand her a lab and say, "Go forth, genius." But no, the world, or more accurately, the post-war patriarchal academic world, preferred her to be quiet, preferably invisible. But Rosalind was neither. In 1951, she moved to King's College London to work on X-ray diffraction techniques, a kind of scientific trickery that allowed one to see the atomic structure of molecules. It was here, in a dim lab, thick with cigarette smoke and quiet egos, that she photographed something extraordinary. They call it Photograph 51. Now picture a fuzzy X-ray image with a mysterious pattern of black spots forming a ragged cross. To most people, it would look like a bad snapshot. To Rosalind, it was the key, the whisper, the DNA spiral, elegant, secret, the blueprint of life. That photograph should have been the centerpiece of a scientific revolution, except she didn't get to make the announcement. Unbeknownst to her, and without her permission, her colleague Maurice Wilkins showed the photograph to James Watson, who, with Francis Crick, used it to construct the now famous model of DNA. While they received the Nobel Prize and basked in eternal scientific fame, Rosalind's contribution was relegated to a footnote, if mentioned at all. It wasn't just theft, it was enforced silence. Rosalind never publicly complained. She didn't stage a dramatic exit or write angry notes in the margins of scientific journals. Instead, she moved on. In 1953, she left King's College London and moved to Birkbeck College, where she switched her focus to studying viruses. Yes, viruses, long before they were trendy or terrifying. She investigated the tobacco mosaic virus, polio, and even began pioneering work on the structure of RNA. She worked relentlessly, driven not by fame or recognition, but by curiosity. Always the work, always the structure. In her personal life, Rosalind was notoriously private. No dramatic romances, no loud scandals. She had close friends, a fondness for travel, and a low tolerance for small talk. She loved hiking, especially in France, and she laughed more than she is given credit for. But no, she was not a warm maternal figure. She wasn't here to make you comfortable. She was here to figure things out. And then, too soon, her body betrayed her. In 1956, she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She kept working through surgery, chemotherapy, and exhaustion until she couldn't. She died on April 16, 1958. She was 37 years old. But Rosalind Franklin did not disappear.
Not quite. You see, dreamer, legacy does not always arrive on time. Sometimes it lags behind, shy and apologetic. Over the years, her role in the DNA discovery became more widely acknowledged. Books have been written, statues erected, labs named. In 2020, nearly a century after her birth, a planned Mars rover was named in her honor. Picture that. Her name etched in the stars. And photograph 51 lives on, that strange, elegant smudge that changed science forever, the secret she saw and others claimed. So now, dear dreamer, as your eyes grow heavy and your breathing evens out, remember her, Rosalind, the quiet storm, the woman who peered into the structure of life and saw its spiral. She didn't need the glory, she had the precision. She didn't need the permission, she had the truth. Let her story seep into your bones as you slumber, reminding you that brilliance is not always loud and that recognition is not always immediate, but real impact endures. And perhaps tomorrow, when you wake up and pour your coffee, you will feel it, the echo of her clarity, her stubborn honesty, her quiet knowing.
Jane Austen, the quiet genius of English literature. On a cold December day in 1775, in the small village of Steventon, Hampshire, England, a child was born who would one day transform the landscape of literature. Her name was Jane Austen, and though she lived a quiet life, her words would echo through the centuries, shaping our understanding of love, society, and the human heart. Few writers have ever captured the subtleties of human nature as Austen did. Her novels, filled with wit, romance, and sharp social critique, are not simply stories about getting married. They are windows into a world where intellect, morality, and resilience shine through even the most rigid social structures. Jane was the seventh of 8 children born into a lively household. Her father, George Austen, was a clergyman and an avid reader who fostered his daughter's love of books. Her mother, Cassandra Lee Austen, was known for her wit and storytelling skills, traits Jane would inherit. Unlike many girls of her time, Jane received a solid education. She attended boarding school for a time, but most of her knowledge came from her father's library, where she devoured Shakespeare, poetry, history, and contemporary novels. Surrounded by her boisterous brothers and beloved sister Cassandra, Jane grew up in a world rich with conversation, humor, and curiosity. From an early age, she began writing stories, plays, and parodies, filling notebooks with narratives that showcased her keen observations of human behavior. By the time Austen was in her 20s, she had begun drafting the novels that would later make her famous. But being a female writer in 18th century England was no easy feat. Women were expected to marry, not write novels that challenged societal norms. Her first completed works, including Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, and Northanger Abbey, were written in secret and shared only with close family and friends. Yet, even in those private circles, it was clear Jane Austen was a literary force about to emerge. In 1811, after years of revision and uncertainty, Sense and Sensibility was finally published, but under the anonymous byline, "By a Lady." This was common for female writers at the time, as it was considered improper for a woman to seek public recognition. The novel was an instant success. Readers were captivated by Austen's sharp wit and realistic portrayal of women's lives. The earnings from this book encouraged her to publish her next work, Pride and Prejudice, in 1813. Originally titled First Impressions,
Pride and Prejudice became her most beloved novel, introducing the world to Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, one of literature's most iconic couples. The novel's opening line remains one of the most famous in English literature. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. With that single sentence, Austen set the stage for a story that was not just about romance, but about pride, class, and the power of personal growth. As Austen continued to write, her novels evolved. Mansfield Park, 1814, tackled morality and social class, while Emma, 1815, introduced a heroine who was independent, wealthy, and uncompromisingly flawed. In Persuasion, 1817, written near the end of her life, Austen explored themes of maturity, regret, and second chances, proving that her insight into human nature only deepened with time. While her novels often center on marriage and courtship, Austen was not simply writing romantic tales. She was challenging the rigid social structures of her time, questioning the role of women, and portraying intelligent, complex heroines who sought more than just a profitable match. Despite her growing literary success, Austen's personal life remained modest. She never married, though she did have at least one known romance, a brief, bittersweet connection with Tom Lefroy, a young man whose family deemed her an unsuitable match due to her lack of wealth. In 1816, Austen's health began to fail. She continued to write even as she weakened, working on Sanditon, an unfinished novel that hinted at a new evolution in her storytelling. On July 18, 1817, at just 41 years old, Jane Austen passed away, likely from Addison's disease or Hodgkin's lymphoma. She was buried in Winchester Cathedral, her grave marked with a simple inscription that did not mention her literary genius. While Austen did not gain widespread celebrity during her lifetime, her legacy has only grown stronger since her death. Her novels, once published anonymously, are celebrated as some of the finest works of English literature. Today, her books are translated into countless languages, adapted into innumerable films, television series, and modern retellings, and continue to inspire generations of readers. Her characters, Elizabeth Bennet, Emma Woodhouse, and Anne Elliot, remain some of the most beloved heroines in literary history. Each is a testament to Austen's understanding of the complexities of love, ambition, and self-discovery. Tonight, as you close your eyes, picture a quiet English village, the soft flicker of candlelight in a cozy sitting room. A woman sits at her writing desk, dipping her pen in ink, crafting words that will outlive her, words that will speak to readers centuries after her time. Sleep well, dear dreamer, and remember, there is no charm equal to tenderness of heart.